offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Sunday Talk.
Good talk.
News Talk. Talk Radio. The Tice Man cometh.
Stir up your Sundays with Richard Tice.
From global current affairs to the issues that hit closer to home.
Richard Tice on Talk Radio.
Hello and welcome this Sunday the 13th of March to this week's Tice Talk here at Talk Radio. I'm on the 17th floor and as I look outside, it's cloudy. There's a little bit of blue sky, and I think that sort of feels to me what's going on in the world. Lots of challenges, lots of clouds, lots of grim news, but the odd bit of good news, and I'll be reflecting that in my show. Obviously, we'll be talking about Ukraine and the impact of that. Some breaking news on that I'll be going to shortly. We need to talk about fuel prices, heating prices here in the UK, the impact of sanctions in Russia itself. But also, going back domestically, we need to be looking at what's happening with the public inquiry into the handling of the COVID pandemic. I'm going to be updating on net zero and shale gas. An extraordinary week has just gone by. That'll be part of my Sunday sermon. And I've got a little bit of good news in the holiday travel sector to try and lift people's spirits. And yes, of course, we need to talk about the non-job of the week. Oh yes, all that coming up and much, much more. We've got some amazing guests, lots of professors this week, but I want your calls, your views. And my big question to you is, for example, where should the proceeds of the sale of Chelsea Football Club go? Where do you think it should go? Should it go to help the refugees in Poland? Should it go to rebuilding Ukraine after the war? Or what? Where would you want to see the proceeds of the sale of Chelsea Football Club and other frozen assets go? Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Text us, 87222, using the word, of course, talk, or tweet us at Talk Radio. And there's no excuse if you want to watch what's going on. It is, of course, Talk Radio TV. You can watch us on YouTube, downloading the app, Apple TV, Samsung, Roku. There's so many different ways to get involved. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. It's Tice Talk for the next 3 hours on Talk Radio.
Richard Tice
On Talk Radio.
Well, as you know, every Sunday morning, this to me for a brief moment feels a bit like a pulpit. And I like to give my Sunday sermon, my thoughts on what's going on, and to ask you questions and to put you in certain situations. And this week, I want you all just to, for a moment, close your eyes. Imagine that you've been reorganising your mortgage. You've dealt with a broker, you've agreed terms, everything's basically sorted with a new mortgage provider, and it's basically just going up to the credit committee to be sort of rubber stamped, formal approval, no problems at all. And then you get a call. It's been rejected because of something that you said publicly over the weekend about wanting a debate on an important issue like net zero. Yeah, just imagine how that might feel. Or imagine if you've booked a wedding venue for the wedding of one of your children. The invites have been sent out. You're all very excited. And then the venue cancels on you, cancels on a signed contract because they didn't like the DJ or the band that you had booked. Imagine then booking a second venue, announcing that to all your guests, and within 3 hours of booking that second venue, the owner of that venue gets text messages, phone calls, threatening him that if he holds this event, there'll be trouble. He really shouldn't do it. Even though, and essentially, then the fear of that owner of that second venue being so great, he actually phones up the people wanting to hold the event saying, please, can I pull out of this signed contract? Now, you're thinking about those things. Where do you think you are? Are you in Russia? Are you in China? Are you in North Korea? all of those places, of course, where freedom of speech is massively restricted. No, I've got bad news, folks. Really bad news. This happened this week here in the United Kingdom. Yes, unbelievably. Because of what I said about wanting a national debate on net zero last Sunday, on Monday afternoon, the lender organising a new mortgage on some commercial property I've got, when it went up to the committee for a rubber stamping, they said no, because of what I'd said over the weekend about net zero and shale gas. My mortgage was refused. And yes, on Tuesday, the venue that we had booked for our first rally for Vote Power Not Poverty in late March, again, a signed contract, they just tweeted out, they'd pulled out. They didn't want a debate about net zero and shale gas in their premises. Interesting. And then yes, on Thursday, when we announced the second venue that we'd booked for this rally, for this event, cross-party speakers, within 3 hours, the owner of that venue was being threatened. This is the United Kingdom. It's unbelievable. He was being threatened with phone calls and with text messages, some of which I have seen. Welcome to the world of wet, feeble, corporate groupthink, consensus groupthink about Boris's net zero plans. A refusal to even allow a proper national debate. Companies are terrified to even have customers who might want to challenge the status quo, who might think there's a better way of reducing emissions, an affordable way that actually helps the lowest paid, the least well off, the most. Welcome to the world of what I call eco-zealots, bullies, who want to threaten you and your suppliers. The absolute fanatics. And then here we go, at a time when fuel prices are at record highs and going north. Yes, you guessed it. Extinction Rebellion have popped back up. Remember them? Yes, they're now planning blockades of oil refineries. So guess what will happen to fuel prices? They'll go up even more. Be under no illusion whatsoever at a time when there's war in Ukraine. We're all worried about the threat of World War III. Yes, the eco-bullies, the extremists, the fanatics, the zealots, they are declaring war here in the United Kingdom on anyone who doesn't follow their green mantra. I really do worry for our future. This week I was declared a Putin lover by these zealots just because I want to debate on net zero, despite the fact that I'm one of the people who's been calling for tougher and tougher economic sanctions. I'm one of the people who've been calling for internal regime change in Russia. But no, the zealots want to call me a Putin lover. Just because we want to have a campaign to discuss net zero, to put forward alternatives, it's not allowed. And my concern, from what I've seen this week, and I have to say I've been quite shocked, is that the battle to discuss this will be more brutal, more vitriolic, and more tougher than the debates over Brexit. Why? Money talks. The vested interests of the Green lobby are absolutely huge. People are making fortunes from the subsidies for renewable energy, fortunes from advising companies in the whole environmental sustainability and good governance agenda. And they don't want anybody to challenge it. Quite extraordinary. And where do you think these lobby groups are funded from? Well, further details emerged today in the Mail on Sunday, and I urge you to read it, about alleged Russian funding of anti-fracking groups, anti-shale gas groups, not only here in the UK, but in Poland, in Romania, in Bulgaria, across Europe. Also, of course, promoted by that Russian state-owned entity media entity Russia Today. Now, I've been speaking about shale gas for months, and despite what I've just said, actually, this week, in a sense, is the first week I think there's some progress, some hope, some light at the end of the tunnel that's not the oncoming train. Because actually, some Conservative MPs have, I think, put sufficient pressure on Boris, have been listening to what we've been talking about, what I've been talking about, the treasure under our feet. And even the Prime Minister himself said that actually they needed to relook at shale gas. And the anti-shale gas business secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, even himself was forced to admit it may be foolish to concrete over the 2 wells that have been drilled near Blackpool. There is a change in mood, and we need to continue debating this, continue promoting this. And even a headline again today, and that's why this debate is so important and so relevant, a headline today that Boris is assembling a task force of oil and gas experts to map his way out of the net zero agenda. So this is up for debate, but it's going to be tough. It's going to be brutal. And we need to be aware of the threats to debate and free speech in this country. We need this debate on shale gas. We need to understand and promote and be world leaders in the new techniques to extract it. And we need a debate on Boris's flawed net zero agenda and the best way to reduce emissions. But what I've learnt this week is it ain't going to be easy, and it's probably not going to be that friendly. Here endeth my Sunday sermon. Give us a call with your thoughts, your views, your experiences. 0344 499 1000. Text us 87222 or tweet at Talk Radio. It is, of course, Tice Talk. Stay with us. Lots to come.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Radio. Spreading your opinions.
These boots were made for talking.
Outweigh and outlast all other arguments.
Plain talking, pioneering.
Let's broaden our minds.
Talk Radio.
The home of common sense.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio, and the tweets and the calls are pouring in already. I'll get to most of those later, but there's one here I just need to clarify from someone called Banff Butterfly, who says, what makes it right this Richard Tice bloke owns more than one property, several properties it seems. He's as bad as the Zealots, maybe worse. What a total hypocrite. Well, Banff, maybe try listening, my friend, because if you had listened, then you would have heard me refer to commercial properties. Yes, these are actually industrial units where people make things, they create things, they design things. People get jobs, they earn money that helps the economy. And yes, that's what I do. That's my business. So listen up, and then maybe you'll be a bit more accurate. Meanwhile, we need obviously to head over to what's going on in Ukraine, the big story around the world. And we're going to head to the border, the Ukrainian-Polish border, to discuss the latest state of play with a humanitarian worker, Alistair Chambers, who's been there for quite a few days, I think, helping and assisting. Alistair, a very good morning. Thanks for joining us here on Talk Radio. Great to have your thoughts. So, obviously, newspapers are full of horrific scenes and stories and experiences, just utterly tragic. And indeed, there's breaking news, just as I came on air, that it seems that there's been a Russian airstrike just some 15 miles from the Ukrainian-Polish border, which obviously gets ever more worrying in terms of proximity to a NATO country. But what are you experiencing and seeing, Alistair, firsthand? Help my listeners sort of just understand the scene.
So if you can imagine coming in, we didn't really know what to expect, in all honesty. And as we're coming in closer and closer to the border, we start seeing a lot of humanitarian vehicles from Germany, Switzerland, Poland coming across. And we actually, at the services, bumped into two English number plates. So we walked over there, spoke to the chaps, and I found out they're actually Ukrainian. And they explained that they've got a whole vehicle full of supplies. Their main worry is they're taking them to the front line. But the chaps are just ordinary guys, plumbers, electricians, helping out the territorial army. They don't have any protection. And this was his main worry. So he didn't know I had a body protection in there that I was going to use when we went into Ukraine. So I went over to the boot, opened the boot up, got this body armor out and handed it to him. And the emotion, he started crying. It's really, really magical moment. And since then, he sent me photos of the heroes on the front line that are wearing the exact helmet and body armor that I gave him. So that was a really...
Quite
really
emotional,
special moment
for sure. Very emotional
since then
moment.
Really emotional, and that was the first point where it really hit me, and also the team. So I've come and some other friends and Lucas's brother to make sure this goes over. And the village we've gone to is Lebrencha Koeska. Apologies to those that haven't pronounced it correctly, and that's the Ukrainian-Polish border. So as we came over to the border to meet Lucas's brother there, we started to see the devastation caused by all the poor people fleeing, and it's been really sad. And when you see refugees on the TV, you don't really understand. It's not the same to actually seeing it in real life. Children holding dogs, mothers, children, and no men. It's really strange to see all these families coming over without fathers. And we sat down with a family where there's 4 daughters. They've got 5 dogs at home, and their father is part of the Ukrainian resistance. He's not a fighter, and he stayed at home to look after the 5 dogs and fight the Russians. And sadly, they hadn't heard from him for 2 days, and they're really concerned. And it's completely devastating. It really is.
I mean, it's so sort of, you really understand. It's fantastic, Alice. You're sort of really helping us understand the fear, the terror in individual families, as you say, mothers, daughters, leaving the father behind to fight for their homeland. And we're sort of reading that obviously there's been so many refugees fleeing Ukraine into Poland. The sort of suggestions that Warsaw are saying that actually there's a limit now, that they can't really take many more, and there needs to be a much greater effort to help from other countries. to take more refugees, to move them on, because we don't know whether it's going to stop at 2 million, 4 million, or 6 million.
I think they're just going to keep coming and coming. I sent some footage over from last night when we went into the Ukraine at the border, and there's traffic for miles of vehicles backed up. And you could just see mothers, children, dogs just coming across the border in flocks. But the system here they've got in Poland is fantastic. So anyone listening that's in the Ukraine that really wants to think about coming over, it's really, really good. You can be welcomed with open arms. Lots of people here from Swiss, Poland, Germany, British, helping out. It's a really, really good system. I'll blown away how well it's run. It's run absolutely fantastic. As soon as they're coming over the border, there's pushchairs for others. Bear in mind, these people, anything refugee, imagine yourself in your home. Bombs going off. You just grab what you can and go. So they haven't got bedding, they haven't got clothing. They've just got what they can in their bag. Maybe a phone, maybe a few bits to drink. They probably drank that and ate that before they come over. So you've got quite a lot of people that are coming over very hungry. And it isn't a poverty-stricken country by all means. So I saw a RS-8 Ukrainian vehicle coming over with a family inside it. So these are people that live a very similar life that we live in England. So it's a massive shock. It's a shock that they didn't think was coming. It's a shock that we didn't think was coming. And the faces, the expressions that these people are pulling on their way over it is actually really horrific. But I can imagine the border.
Yeah, please do, Alistair. In terms of the quantity of medical supplies, of clothing, blankets, and things, what is that like? Do you get a sense there's enough, or does there need to be more?
Keep it coming. Keep it coming. I think this is what Putin's really didn't think. I think he's completely blown away, and I think that's why last night when we were in the Ukrainian border, 8 kilometers away, the bombs were going off in the area we are at, because they're scared. Russia is scared because they didn't realize that, okay, we might not be coming over with weapons, but we're coming over, we're supplying people with food, we're supplying people with blankets, we're supplying people with medical equipment, and the amount of people involved is unbelievable. So our lorries have come from Gloucester, that's where we're from, Gloucestershire. And while we're there, our lorry come up, then came a lorry from Germany, and they helped us unload their lorry, we helped them unload theirs. Then a Swiss lorry came, then 2 vans came from Cheltenham, Gloucestershire. Then another vehicle came from Germany. There's some Polish vehicles come along. And the amount of people just keep coming in day by day. They've given up their jobs, bankers, doctors, nurses. It's unbelievable. It really is. It's really special.
Well, I mean, that's amazing. Amazing to hear, Alistair. And obviously, given the sort of the direction of travel, the lack of a solution in the immediate days and weeks, this is, I mean, we could be just at the, almost just at the beginning. These numbers could grow massively. Is there any discussion that you're hearing about the sort of the preparations for ever greater numbers?
As we're coming out, I started seeing new refugee camps being set up. They were set up on the way in. But again, I like to assure people that what the Polish government are doing is unbelievable. It's fantastic. So people are coming across the border, and there's pushchairs ready for them to grab. There's soup ready. There's sandwiches being made. There's phone chargers for them to plug their phone in. There's mobile battery things for them to take. There's sweets for the kids. There's toys the kids can take. There's temporary areas, heated areas for them to sit. Then they got on a bus, then they go to an area that, call it a processing area, but that sounds a bit harsh. It's not processing area. It's an area where they come in, they're welcomed with barbecue, grill, warm fire pits, gas heaters. What the Polish government are doing is absolutely fantastic, and hats off to them 100%. It's really, really good here. And then they're into the sports centre, and I went into the sports centre and we didn't take photos in there because I wanted to journalise this and try and show people what's happening. But going into the sports centre and seeing the mothers and the children in there, that was really hard. And
sure,
although I'm trying to photo everything, I couldn't take a photo now. I just, honestly, it's heartbreaking.
Some of the videos you've sent us, Alistair, we've put on to YouTube and been showing people who are watching rather than listening. Alistair, thank you so much. It does sound as though the Polish government have got this incredibly well organised in really sort of fast time, urgent time, and all credit to them. And I suspect that many of us could learn lessons from that. Alistair, thank you very much for your thoughts. That's Alistair Chambers.
Sorry, just one. Before you go, I just want a quick shout out to Andre that came with me. I know he's come on your talk shows before. Andre's a friend of mine. But yeah, he's a great laugh, and I'm sure he's got some stories to tell you as well. So thank you very much.
For sure. Alistair, that's great. That's Alistair Chambers on the Ukrainian-Polish border, helping out, giving his experience firsthand of the conditions, what's going on. And as he said, hats off to the Polish government. But clearly, we've all got to make a huge effort because this humanitarian crisis could grow and grow. We'll be talking more and more about Ukraine through the show. Meanwhile, lots of tweets and things coming in about my Sunday sermon. We've got one here says, there's so much money to be made from net zero. Follow the money. It's all about the money. That's from William. I agree. Another one, Christy says, I should take legal action against the mortgage company for my commercial properties. Banff, there we are. Yeah, I'll be... and then Pete, he says that... what does Pete say? Oh, yes, about... tweet here about the gentleman I was at the rugby with yesterday. What a game that was, and what a referee's decision early doors. There we are, more of that later on. Stay with us. We'll be, after the break, talking about the Queen's health and taking your calls and messages. It's Tice Talk on Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Richard Tice on Talk Radio.
A first magnitude star of common sense.
The Tice Man.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
Richard Tice.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. Keep those calls coming in 0344 499 1000. We'll be going to those shortly. And later this hour, we're going to be talking about the impact in Russia and indeed around the world of the increasingly tight sanctions and how long it may take in order to create sufficient pressure inside Russia on the Putin regime. But we've also got to talk about an incredibly important issue here at home, which is our amazing Queen and how she is, because she's had to pull out of the Commonwealth service at the Westminster Abbey tomorrow, which is something that I think is a very sort of special place in her diary. And so we're going to go to Rupert Bell, who is our royal correspondent. Rupert, a very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us. So we hear the Queen can't make the service tomorrow, and there's even fears that she may be struggling to make the Thanksgiving service for the Duke of Edinburgh, her husband, later this month. What's the latest, Rupert? What's the update?
Well, it appears that she's getting increasingly frail, and it's actually getting around that is causing her the problems. Mentally, she's still as sharp as ever, but clearly, and we've seen it, you know, and as she said in various sort of Zoom calls with various people and meeting, you know, moving is a problem, and they were worried about her being on her feet for an hour, and, you know, that is going to it's increasingly difficult for her. She's a woman with immense pride, and there's talk about not using a wheelchair. She doesn't want to be seen, the frailty for all to see. So her pride is very much at stake here, but she does, and clearly the memorial service for her husband is obviously an incredibly important moment for her, and she will be doing everything to be there, but it's how that is managed so it's not putting her under undue physical strain, because clearly she is getting increasingly frail.
Yes, and the managing it, as you say, so that perhaps, for example, she can enter premises or the Abbey or a cathedral via a side door and be sort of in situ much more easily, as opposed to having walked down the central aisle, that sort of thing. But even that clearly is a real challenge, it sounds.
It is. It's all a physical challenge, you know, and you're reading about that she's not able to walk her dogs anymore and all those sort of things. Now, I'm not privy to that level of information, but clearly the fact that she has pulled out of this service tomorrow is an indication that she is struggling. It's for obvious reasons, because that was an important service that she had hoped to attend tomorrow. And it appears now that every time there does seem to be, it becomes increasingly difficult for her to fill outside engagements. I think that is the issue. And Westminster Abbey, yes, I'm sure they'll be doing everything. But bearing in mind, we have the Platinum Jubilee celebrations coming up at the beginning of June and other events along the way. It is going to be increasingly difficult for her to get to these events. But clearly, you know, obvious reasons, she's 95, 96. She is, not surprisingly, getting frail. But her mother used to go around in a golf buggy. I remember at Royal Ascot back in the day when she used to, you know, the Royal Golf buggy would be speeding around at Royal Ascot to take her to the parade ring. So
absolutely, we remember that. And the chirpy smile on her face. So, yeah. I mean, obviously the Queen is incredibly proud and wants to sort of lead from the front. But clearly it sounds like the mind is willing, but the body is a bit more reluctant.
I think that is, you've summed it up perfectly. That is the issue for her. And we've seen that her mind is still as sharp as it, you know, and you know, from whatever she's involved in, she feels and genuinely engages with people. But it's, as she said, moving is the big issue. And as she mentioned, I think it was to Prime Minister Trudeau, that yes, she's there, but moving is the issue. And being on her feet for a long time is also an issue.
Rupert, thank you very much indeed for that quick update on the Queen's health. We wish her well and we wish her more mobility. Let's take a couple of quick calls. I think I've got James from, where's James? In Telford in Shropshire. James, good morning to you.
Good morning, Richard. Let's start by saying God save the Queen.
Absolutely right. For a very long time.
Richard,
what are your thoughts?
I'm looking at an 18-month average retail price chart from the US Association of Gas Retailers.
All right. Do tell.
Now, I'll admit that I've only got 18 months of sales data in front of me, so it might be slightly, shall we say, Chris Whitty Sage-like, my graph. I might have been cherry-picking
what's it telling you?
The graph because I don't know what comes before. But what I can tell you is when Trump was in power, the cost of American gas kind of fluctuated between $2.10, $2.30 for a gallon. As soon as the election results come in, that spikes to $2.50. As soon as Biden's sworn in, it spikes to $2.90 and then gradually tracks up to almost $1 more, $3.30. This is before Russia has invaded Ukraine. So what I'm saying to people is the rise in the price of fuel is directly related to the American president, not necessarily the Russian premier.
OK, now, and funny enough, I'm glad you raised that actually, James, because that is true. For example, Biden started to clamped down on new licenses for exploration, clamped down, I think, on a pipeline between the US and Canada. But in that same period, if you look at the rising gas prices here in Europe, whilst in America they've increased, I think over the last year and a half, by about 40 to 50%, they've increased by about 400%, about 9 times more in the UK and Europe. And that's directly linked to our vulnerability and our dependency on importing energy from rogue actors such as Russia. So, there's a combination of factors, but what we do see, James, is that because the US is self-reliant and independent on its energy, that's why the rise has been much, much lower. And, of course, the price itself is much lower.
Yeah, that is true. I just wanted to point out that it's not a one-way ticket. Just a quick word about Ukraine and the coverage. I think we need more balance. It wasn't that long ago that we were all slating the Hungarian football fans for being totally racist to our players, and we're all up in arms about it. Now, there's a reason why most of Eastern Europe lean towards the right side of politics, and that's because they lived 4 years underneath communist socialist Russia. So it's obvious that when they got their independence, they were going to go really far to the other side, which is why Poland, Ukraine, Hungary, all the Slovaks are all pretty right-wing.
It's a good point, James, actually. They're sort of reacting against the left-wing communism.
It's an ideological battle as well as anything else.
No, James, a very good point, well made. Thank you very much for that. Was James in Shropshire. We're going to head down south-southeast to Kim, who is in Kent. Morning, Kim.
Hello, Richard.
Hi, how are you feeling? What's on your mind this morning?
Well, I'm just incredulous. The more rubbish I hear from these woke idiots, the more incensed I become.
Likewise, share your thoughts.
They can't see what's coming down the road. I've got a message from history for them, from none other than Churchill. An appeaser is one who feeds a crocodile hoping it will eat him last.
Yes.
Right? And these are Putin-supporting hypocrites. And they are bowing to the altar of communism. When are they going to wake up and realise that if they want full-on communism, they're going to have to give up all their Western gadgetry, all the things they enjoy under capitalism, they're going to have to give it up. And they can't see this coming towards them. And it's coming towards them like a 10-ton truck. And they're going along with it because they're stupid. Like the one that sent you that message, Bam, was it?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, that's all about envy. It's all about envy. Didn't listen, as you said, didn't listen to what you said, because those properties will provide employment for people. But these people are too thick to understand the simplicity of it.
Well, I think, and I think, in a sense, you're so right, Kim, that people have got to wake up. And, tragically, the Ukrainian crisis has been a massive wake-up call. And, if we don't stand up to a bully, and let's be under no illusion, Putin is a dictatorial bully, then that bully will push and push and push. And, in a sense, we haven't learned the lessons of the past.
Well, it's like the playground bully, isn't it? Surrounds himself with much weaker kind of people that, nevertheless, even though they're weak, they want to be seen to be on his side, because they're too scared themselves, because they don't have the capacity to look properly at these things and actually allow some actual debate on them.
That's right. And so, Kim, if you look forward, we don't know whether it's days or weeks, but the suggestion that we obviously pray won't happen, but could happen, that Putin might, because the war's not going his way, start to use ever more horrific weapons, for example, chemical bombs, or God forbid, small, tactical nuclear weapons. At what point do you think that Western leaders like Biden would actually say enough is enough?
Well, I don't trust Biden as far as I can throw him, because he's, him and his son. Let's say no more about that. We all know the story about that. But this is what these idiots don't seem to understand. They're self-flagellators, as far as I'm concerned. They just go along with this like sheep, and they just do not see what's coming down the road. We've just finished a pandemic, and now we're going into a third world war potentially. Hopefully, God forbid.
Let's hope not, Kim. You're right to raise it and concerns, and appeasement never works. That was Kim in Kent. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000 with your thoughts. Tweets coming in. One here I quite like. I don't think your terminology is strong enough, Richard. You need to refer to them as to what they really are. Eco-fascists. There we are. Another one here from Simon says, if we can't book a venue to debate, I'm sure it's nothing to do with the fact that some are going to make, I can't read that word out, but basically bucket loads of money out of this net zero. Stay with us. Coming up, we are going to be talking about the impact of sanctions on Russia with an expert from the University of St Gallen in Switzerland. It's Tice Talk on Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Talk Radio.
Smooth, strong, and very long.
Tell your ears to chew on this.
We think what you say.
Thoughtfully you're thinking.
The home of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk, and in the second hour we're going to be coming back domestically to talk about the impact of ever higher fuel prices, record fuel prices, and also the public inquiry into COVID. And I want your thoughts, your calls, your views on that public inquiry. But for the moment, we are still international. We've been on the Ukrainian border, and now we're heading to Switzerland, to St. Gallen, the University of St. Gallen, to discuss the impact of the sanctions that's been imposed on Russia, on trade, both ways, and what impact they may be having in Russia itself, on the economy, on people, but also the potential knock-on impact on our own lives, jobs and economies. So I'm delighted to be joined now by Simon Evnet, who's a trade policy analyst at the University of St. Gallen. Simon, a very good morning. Thanks for joining us. And
good morning, Richard.
Good morning. There's sort of various reports and articles about the massive impact that is starting to be felt in Russia of these sanctions that I think are probably greater than the likes of Putin and the Kremlin regime expected. But you really understand this stuff. What's your sense of the speed of impact and what might happen over the coming months?
So I think we have to differentiate between the financial sanctions which were put in place a couple of weeks ago and the trade sanctions which were announced on Friday. The former are really biting now. I mean, as of Saturday, Russian banks, the main Russian banks, can't really do any type of international transactions. There's been a big grab on Putin's central bank reserves, which basically stops them financing as many imports as they used to be able to do. All of this is really turning up the screws on the Russian economy. And I think we've seen forecasts of falls in their national output in the next quarter of anything from 7 to about 20%, which is a massive shock. So Russian living standards are going to take a beating, and you will see very high levels of unemployment there. But I think that's really very much the financial sanctions. The trade sanctions, which have been announced on Friday, I think are going to have much smaller effect. But that's mainly because the damage has been done by the other ones. So, they will start feeling pain. The question, I think, which is less of an economic one, is whether this translates into change in policy by Putin towards...
Yes, I read a figure that the sanctions could cost about 400,000 Russian jobs in the energy sector alone, as trade reduces by over 50% between Russia and Western nations.
That's right.
And how quickly might that be? And to what sense do you feel that the Russian people might actually sort of look beyond the disinformation and say something's not right?
So let's start with the numbers. I mean, when we looked into this last week, we think the maximum hit they'll take is about 520,000 jobs in this. And most of it will be concentrated in the energy sector, which are often fairly high-paying jobs. So there will be a lot of families which are hurting. Then I guess the question is the blame game, and can the Kremlin deflect the blame game onto the West yet again, or do people start asking harder questions at home? I think that's the key. We expect trade from Russia to the EU and the G7 to go down by anything from 50 to 70%. So we'll be cutting off a lot of links with Russia there. And then it's really down to, as I said, who takes the blame on this in the Russian media?
Who takes indeed.
Sorry, go on.
Because I read that, for example, some of the big global shipping container companies, that they've stopped essentially moving containers to and from Russia again. So that's going to have a pretty rapid impact, isn't it?
Correct. And so what we're seeing is both the shipping companies and the freight forwarders, who play a critical role in getting stuff to and from the ports. A lot of them are shunning Russian goods, and in fact, even shunning goods going anywhere near Russia, so even to the Baltics and places like this. Now, at the moment, it's not completely cut off, but it's going to get harder and harder. And this, of course, will prevent Russian middle-class people from going to IKEA and things like this, which they apparently really value. So this is going to have a knock-on effect. I mean, I don't... but you should be clear here, the Russians went through this before when they invaded Crimea, and they were cut off from a lot of European foods. They couldn't have their Roquefort or all the fancy cheeses and all the rest of it. So they've done this switch before, and it didn't topple Putin.
Yes, but I guess that was much more serious. A massive double-page spread in one of the Sunday newspapers today entitled "Last Exit from Moscow," and I was really struck by a comment from one young Russian who said the Kremlin has stolen our future, and in a sense, if enough people feel like that, then the internal pressure will grow. But I guess it's just a question of the pace of that.
That's one bit, but I can tell you, having taught loads of Russian students over the years, a lot of the more liberal-minded Western ones have already left. And the problem is, if they leave, they don't stick around to fight for change. They lament the situation back home, but they're not really an instrument of change. And so you may end up actually with the more nationalistic ones staying, and we know where that's going to lead.
Interesting. That's very interesting, and I guess a lot of it, as you say, is about the quality, the disinformation, and whether or not they're prepared to put up with it. And just finally, Simon, someone suggested to me that actually, although the banking and financial sanctions are important, that actually there's a huge number of Russians who don't have bank accounts, who sort of exist off cash, sort of a cash economy. Is that the case?
From what I've seen of the numbers, I'm not. There must be some of that. I don't think it goes as far as might have been implied to you, because the number of bank accounts is smaller than the Russian adult population by some margin. But you know, the Russians are tenacious at getting through tough times. I mean, just look at their history. And so I think they will get through. The question is whether they let Putin get through.
Well, that's right. Simon, thank you so much for that. That's Simon Evnet, the trade policy analyst at the University of St Gallen, a real expert who understands. And it's interesting to separate out the financial sanctions that's clearly having an impact over the last couple of weeks and the newly announced trade sanctions. For me, the key is, though, that they are properly enforced, properly imposed. And when I read that some, the likes of Germany are sort of rowing back on some of this stuff because they're concerned about the impact on their own economy, I'm thinking, really? Where's the unity? Where's the collective spirit to make a massive difference and to push for internal regime change? So my view is that we've got to impose these trade sanctions harshly, toughly, robustly across the whole of the European nations and the US. And there can't be any sort of wilting flower about this because one's concerned about the impact. Well, there's going to be some short-term pain, but hopefully that will lead to medium-term gain. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000 with your thoughts. It's Tice Talk here at Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Morning Talk.
Sunday Talk.
Talk Radio. Richard Tice. Powered by Debate. Sunday morning with the Tice Man. Richard Tice. The heart of a common sense Sunday.
Richard Tice.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. We're into the second hour, and unfortunately, outside, the skies are darkening. The clouds are getting darker and more prominent. Maybe that reflects the news. Who knows? Certainly lots of messages coming in. One here from Chris says, appalling these companies treating you like this. They need to be named and shamed. So those of us that agree with debate and democracy can choose not to put their business with them. Good point. Go woke, go broke, as they say. Chris, you are quite right. Another one here from another Chris in Ottershaw. There seems to be an unholy alliance between Putin's useful idiots in Extinction Rebellion and the large landowners that receive massive subsidies for wind turbines and solar farms. It's time for the government to call it out for what it is. Well, unfortunately, Chris, the reality is that the government is complicit in these massive subsidies. Well, we've been to Switzerland, we've been to the Ukraine border, we're coming straight back to Kent because the impact on people is being felt here in the UK at the pumps. Yes, fuel prices have soared to what I think are record highs. But my next guest, I'm delighted to be joined by Howard Cox, who's the co-founder of the Fair Fuel UK campaign, who's got, I think, over 1 million followers, who's been battling for fair fuel prices for many, many years, to tell us what's the latest news on fuel prices and where they may be going. Howard, a very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us. And, I mean, you've been sort of closer than most people to the relationship between fuel prices, oil prices, government and taxes. What's going on? I mean, what's sort of the average now across the UK on the forecourt, apart from the service station?
Well, it's great to be on your show, Richard. I really thoroughly enjoy listening to you. You're an incredible inspiration to all of us. One of the things that people say, we hear the average price, but if you look at some people in the rural areas, they don't believe the average price. We're looking at something around about 163, 164 for petrol and approaching 170 for diesel. These are eye-watering prices. They are economically crippling prices to particularly for inflation, and everything in your studio, your home, everything was delivered once on a diesel truck, and people are very anxious at the moment in time in terms of how they're going to face national insurance rise, the cap coming off our energy bills, and of course these pump prices rocketing up. It's a perfect storm for all the opportunists.
And what danger, Howard, that actually these prices could creep up to £2 a litre? I know in some examples it may have already hit that, but as an average, could you see the average trending up that level?
Well, it's interesting. About 2 or 3 days ago, Richard, oil nearly hit $140. We're seeing now that it's sort of stabilised at $30 less, around $110, $112, which proves that it is an opportunistic, speculating game being played with all our costs of living. And if it stays at this area, I don't think it'll hit £2 on average. But unfortunately, we can't. Who knows what's going to happen with the Putin saga, the impact on us. We only have 5 to 8% of our oil coming from Russia. 18% of our diesel comes from there, though. So obviously, people are using that to actually these faceless speculators, Richard, who really are just playing with our lives.
And meanwhile, Howard, these nice, friendly people called Extinction Rebellion think it's a good time to block up our oil refineries in a week or two. That's not going to help, is it?
No, it's not going to help. And of course, there's two things about that. One, yes, it will force up prices, but it'll also cause panic buying. We're going to see queues outside those garages. And again, the government could stop all of this now. They could stop everything. They could put a guard around all the refineries now. There's only 7 of them in this country. It wouldn't take much to do that. And more importantly, they could do 2 things. One is to cut fuel duty now. And today we're launching, please, your listeners, please sign up to Fairfield UK. We put together a way to contact your MP to get their support. And most decent, honest MPs are supporting a cut in fuel duty at the moment. So please...
OK, and let's just look at that in detail, Howard, because as I understand, with the increase in the price of fuel, obviously the government's now collecting a lot more by way of tax on that increase in price. So it's collecting, I think, billions of pounds extra. So what sort of cut in fuel duty could actually the government essentially release to us all that reflects that increased tax revenue they've got?
Well, we estimate something around about an annualised of £3 billion of extra VAT, and that's the one that's hurting people the most. Believe it or not, the tax take, because of the high prices, has dropped from around 70 or 80% to 55%. So it doesn't seem so much. It's about half is but it's still a huge amount. The VAT, the 3 billion, is equivalent to around about a 10p cut in fuel duty.
Wow.
But we're calling for 5p at the moment. That would give some respite. But the major thing to do as well is to stop this profiteering. Back in 2014, Richard, when the oil prices were a similar level now, and taking into account exchange rate situation and pricing a barrel of oil in sterling, pump prices are 10 to 15p more than they need be at the moment. And that's pure opportunistic profiteering. Got it. So obviously, if you talk to some of the nice ministers in the cabinet who are very pro-net zero, they'll just be saying to you, well, Howard, that's all fine. If you don't want to pay these higher prices, then just go and buy a nice electric car. What's the problem? I'm very pro-electric vehicles, contrary to other people think I'm a fossil fuel junkie. I'm accused by those green people on Twitter.
I've even got one, Howard, but obviously, you know, in reality, that's not realistic, is it?
No, it's not. It's not realistic. You can't deliver a 40-ton truck on batteries. Those are the sorts of things that we've got to take into consideration. What is so wrong about this government? They're forcing us into an unconsulted decision into one mode of transport. There's lots of other ways of cleaning the air we breathe. All drivers want to breathe clean air, but we don't need to be forced into one form of modal transit, electric vehicles. They're not ready. They're going to really hit the national grid. I think I'm talking to a convert who understands it better than anyone. I've driven electric vehicles. You're not paying any taxes. There's going to be road charge. We're going to lose about 8 billion of fuel duty by 2030. And how's that going to be replaced? We're going to have road charging. And therefore, electric vehicles, I'm afraid, will be paying something to use the roads. And I'm going to make sure they are too.
For sure. And just finally, Howard, this thing, red diesel, as opposed to white diesel, just to help my listeners and viewers with what that's all about and what impact it may have on businesses and therefore jobs.
Well, up until April the 1st this year, just coming round the corner, red diesel has always been taxed at a much lower rate in terms of fuel duty. But the government decided to remove that discounted rate. And for all those farmers, most farmers are exempt, but it's the construction workers, the building sites, etc., the JCBs and all those vehicles you see there will now have to pay the full rate, which means everything else we've got to have to pay more for. And a lot of businesses, especially construction businesses, the small one-man band type person who hires out his JCB, won't be able to afford that. And guess what? We'll be paying more.
So that basically, that's an increase in tax. By what sort of percentage from the red diesel rate to the sort of the domestic, the white diesel rate?
About 60 to 70% increase.
Wow. So in a sense, that's just a tax on jobs. It's a tax on growth. It's a tax on our economy. It's a tax on all our livelihoods by this government. Is that right?
You're absolutely right. You can't believe this is a Conservative government with a national insurance rise, all of the sorts of things here. Fuel duty, I'm hearing Rishi's not going to actually cut it. But if we have as much support from your listeners as possible, our 1.7 million supporters are going to be writing to him as well. Here, get the message that he's got to do this, because otherwise they won't be voting Tory.
Howard, thank you so much for those thoughts. That's Howard Cox, the co-founder of the Fair Fuel campaign. You heard it here. Actually, the Chancellor could afford to cut the fuel duty. The big question is, will he? Well, he might, if you write to your MP and tell them that you think the government should be cutting taxes, particularly on fuel duty and on the national insurance, in order to protect jobs and to grow the economy. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. We're heading down from Kent to Exeter, where I think I've got Rudy on the line. Good morning.
Hi there. A couple of things about these sanctions. What I find quite confusing is that when Apple closed their stores in Russia, they reopened them within 2 days. And I know that because I've got friends in Moscow.
Interesting. And do you know why that is, Rudy?
No, all they've told me is that they've just put the prices slightly up on the products, but they reopened the stores. And the other interesting thing, Richard, is I got another friend in St. Petersburg that works for a French company, and they've told her that her job is safe because Macron has told all French companies not to leave Russia.
Interesting. So I heard about this with some of these franchises, because a lot of the international brands with their Russian stores are essentially sort of franchises with a local partner. And as I understand, but someone else listening may correct us, some of those franchise agreements are written so that if the international partner says, you've got to shut, you can't use our brand, then they have to do that. But some of the others are written in a way where actually the local partner is the one that makes the decision whether to remain open or close. So it may be almost like an individual case-by-case basis on a particular store in a particular location. That's my understanding.
This was Moscow that I was talking about. And the second thing is, Apple was still supplying the shop those products. So Apple could withdraw supplying that franchise the products, at this time. Or they could stop it so that shipping companies can't deliver those products, so that the shipping companies can't deliver certain kinds of products to Russia.
That's a very good point. At some point, they're going to run out of the international goods. I mean, that must be right, Rudy. And it's interesting whether or not, for example, related to this, what's just been on the news, the Peppa Pig ruling. It looks as though Moscow may essentially try to sort of just ignore international patents and trademarks, and they could sort of essentially steal them and just use them as they see fit. And if they're prepared to do it with Peppa Pig, who knows where that will stop. Rudy, thank you so much for that thoughts. If anyone else has got any understanding or knowledge about whether or not international stores are reopening in Russia, that would be really helpful as we try and understand the impact on the Russian people in towns and cities across Russia. We're going to take a quick break and then more calls and tweets and texts. 0344 499 1000. I want to hear your thoughts, your experiences, your views. Stay with us on Tice Talk here at Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV. The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Radio. Accept no substitutes.
Access all arguments.
The UK's official opinion exchange.
Free Speech Radio.
Shut up and listen.
We're on your side. The home of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk this Sunday morning. We're well into the second hour. Lots of messages and calls coming in that we'll go to in a second. Interesting tweet here from Bradker, I think it is. I may have pronounced that wrong. Richard almost fooled me into voting for you. Thought you might be different to the other parties, but you want us to suffer hardship over a war that isn't ours. OK, make Russia poorer, but why should we have to take the hit? Might as well start World War III. It's actually, I mean, it's a really good question. But the reality is, it's because we want to avoid World War III that actually we're saying the alternative, in order to stand up to the bully Putin, because if you don't stand up to him, he ain't going to stop at Ukraine. He's just going to go on and on and on. That's why we've got to impose sanctions on Russia. And it's not, we've got to be realistic that they're probably going to expose sanctions on us in reverse. And therefore, as I say, yes, regrettably, potentially short-term pain, but for medium-term gain. None of us want this crisis. It's totally at the behest of Putin, but obviously what we have to do is to work out the best way to respond. And it's because we don't want World War III that our best alternative is to try and get regime change in Russia by imposing really tight economic sanctions. But maybe call in or send us a tweet if you continue to disagree, Bradker. Anyway, let's go over to London, where Robert is patiently waiting. Good morning.
Good morning, Richard. Well, I disagree with the premise of what you're saying, the idea that the sanctions are going to work. And I come at this 25 years in the financial markets, and I was just chatting to an agri-economist on Friday. Sanctions are going to hurt the West far more than they're going to hurt Russia. If you take two balance sheets and you take the Russian balance sheet, which is stuffed full of commodities and, whether it's food or timber, nickel, oil and gas, obviously energy, which are really important, and you take a Western balance sheet stuffed full of debt and having to import everything because we've given up on energy security and things like that. We were too busy discussing how many genders there were over the last 10 years. What you end up when you start the hyperinflation is the guy with the commodities is in a far better position than you.
If you still continue to import those commodities, that's the crucial thing, isn't it?
Well, then if you stop importing the commodities, what's going to happen? And there are food riots now going on in Iraq. This colleague of mine has been to the wheat-producing regions of Russia and Ukraine. He's been all over the world, actually. He produces intelligence for all kinds of large customers. I don't think people understand what is about to happen in the next 2 or 3 years. You think people are saying, it's 185 for petrol. I bought petrol yesterday, 184. Forget it. You're going to see petrol at £5. You are going to see a breakdown of everything that we know. You are going to see food disruption and all the rest of it, and it'll be self-imposed. And the reason I think our government's pushing the sanctions is because the Conservative Party, of course, is awash with Russian cash and is so embarrassed that it wants to be seen to reacting. And therefore, the pain that's going to be caused, rather than a negotiated settlement, which is what we should be discussing in Ukraine, which is a realpolitik of saying you're going to be neutral, that's it. Sorry, yes, you're sovereign state. You're stuck between two superpowers. Be like Finland. Be like Sweden. Be neutral. Rather than that, we are going to absolutely... The pain that's coming, Richard, is off the Richter scale.
But there are options here. There's two things. I mean, there is pain, but there's two things that actually come out of this. One is we have to be energy self-reliant and independent, but that obviously is not going to happen overnight. But the other thing actually that the government can do that are touched on with Howard Cox, but could do in a much more aggressive way, is to use the government's balance sheet to actually cut taxes hard so that pain from the higher prices can be offset by much, much lower taxes. So that on a net basis, one is, give or take, not far different. That to me, that's actually within the government's abilities. Yes, that means that we've got to take some increased borrowings, but we're in an economic war zone. We've just come out of an emergency with COVID. And I remind everybody, between the two world wars for 30 years, we had national debt well over 50% higher than current levels. The thing is, you've got to cut taxes to grow.
Well, look, that's exactly what Trump did. He cut taxes, made America energy self-sufficient, and the economy was absolutely taking off. And then, of course, we've got the geriatric in charge now, who I still know people who are saying to me that the world is a safer place under Biden. That's the power of the media, of course.
Robert, so just finally, Robert, do you think if Trump had still been in charge, that Putin would have gone into Ukraine?
No, of course not. Trump and Putin could have done a deal because they are both businessmen. This war is about commodities. This war is about Putin protecting and defending himself from an encroaching... for us 10 years ago, the EU will cause the next European war.
Well,
he was right.
Robert, thank you very much for those thoughts. That was Robert in London. We're going to head now way up to Ilkley. Lovely Ilkley in West Yorkshire, where I think Craig is patiently waiting. Morning, Craig.
Hello, good morning, Richard. Thank you for calling me back and taking my call today on this lovely Sunday morning. Yeah, so just a few points. So, I'm very concerned, as are many people, about the costs of rising energy prices. So I have a few ideas, and I don't know if after the show you have an hour on a train where you could, sit down and Google or search for something. And if you do have that time, I highly recommend that you look for the Hong Kong scheme of control that regulates the energy market in Hong Kong. So I know a little bit about that. I lived overseas in Hong Kong for 30 years, and that scheme of control that is used to regulate the marketplace there has resulted in the last announcement of the energy prices going up of between 7 and 8%. So if they can do it in Hong Kong, 7 and 8% electricity price increases, why we're not seeing that here? And the way they do it in Hong Kong is that they limit the amount of money that the energy providers can make, and the most of that is based on the net asset value of the energy providers. So it does a couple of things. If the energy providers don't keep investing in new technology and new infrastructure, then it limits how much money they can make, because inevitably their net asset values will depreciate over time by, I think, 15 or 20% per year. So they're encouraged to
do they have,
things.
presumably, do they have much lower taxes on energy and fuel prices, do you know?
I don't think there are any as such. There's no VAT.
Yes, that's actually really interesting. And Craig, I will look at that, because actually what you've got there is you've got Hong Kong, which historically is a very open, free market, relatively low regulation, low tax levels. But actually in something that's so critical to everything, what you're saying is they've got a sort of a tighter regulatory regime so that profits can be made, but not super profits.
Exactly, and what would happen here is that if they had a similar scheme here, you'd see the energy providers here digging up the roads, installing new, fatter, higher capacity cables to people's houses, ready for the EV revolution if that never happens. Which, of course, we're not seeing, because we keep talking about how if everybody had an EV and they plugged them in, the whole network would just die.
That's fascinating, Chris. What you're actually saying, that's another version, probably a much smarter version, of the discussions we're having about windfall tax on our energy companies, because all of a sudden they're making a bunch of money, even though in 2020 they were losing a bunch of money. Yeah, very interesting.
So
Craig,
highly recommend you look at that. Just one final point.
Yes,
if I can. Net feed-in tariffs for solar generation. So in many markets in the US, you can feed into the network and obtain a rate the same as what you consume at in the nighttime. So many homes don't need batteries because they feed in excess power to the grid in the daytime. We can't do that here. So I've looked at solar for my house. With a battery, it's £14,000. Without a battery, it's £9,000. But the feed-in tariff doesn't really work in my favour. So what we should be doing is having net. So if you're paying 25 pence per kilowatt hour to consume, you should also get that for generation. Yes. And then your home solar would be much cheaper.
You're absolutely right, Craig. And I think that was where it started a while back with the feed-in tariffs, and then the government concluded it was too generous. But that's a really good point. Funny enough, I've been looking at that because I've been installing solar panels that were made in Spain. I wish they were made here in the UK, but there isn't any availability, and looking exactly at those feed-in tariffs. Craig, thank you very much. Great call, fascinating. I shall look at that when I've got some time on a train, the Hong Kong scheme of control. Meanwhile, we're up to Crewe, I think, where Charlie is. Hello, Charlie.
Hi, Richard. How are you?
I'm all right. Maybe you'll make things even brighter today, or not?
Well, hopefully. I mean, I have a Russian wife for 20-odd years now. And I do want to put a positive slant on it. Not everybody in Moscow, not everyone in Russia has ever been for the Putin regime, and even before the Putin regime. You know, but I do get a feeling that there's a lot of anti-Russian sentiment about in the general public, and I think that needs to stop.
That's a really good point, actually, Charlie. And I think, actually, the Prime Minister himself talked about the fact that this is, of course, this is with us, essentially, our gripe, our battle and our sanctions is really with the Putin regime, not the Russian people. And, I mean, obviously, there are some Russians, we don't really know what percentage, that do support Putin, but there's obviously a huge percentage, both in Russia and internationally, who don't support this.
Yeah, I mean, my father-in-law, my mother-in-law, and my sisters and their children all live in Moscow, and I get a slant on both sides of the story. They are, a lot of them are very nationalistic, and rightly so. You know, I'm British, I'm nationalistic. Tatiana is British and Russian. You know, but at the end of the day, these sanctions are going to hit Russia really hard. No. And in my opinion, in our opinion, it won't change very much in Russia.
That's interesting. I mean, so you think I'm being too optimistic about the prospect of internal regime change?
Absolutely, that will never happen. There's 1,000 years of Russian history, and when I married Tatiana in 1988, the point was I found out all about Russia. She told me all about Russia. I told all about Britain. I know all about the Russian history. And you've got to go way, way back.
Okay,
this is not a country that's going to change anytime soon.
Interesting. That's very interesting. There's Charlie with his experience from his Russian wife, that maybe I'm being a bit optimistic about internal regime change. Time will tell. Stay with us. We're going to be talking about the COVID public inquiry after the news. Stay with us on Tice Talk here at Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV. The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Richard Tice on Talk Radio.
World headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio. Listen on DAB+.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
Richard Tice, Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. It's 11:34 here on Talk Radio. We're well into the second hour, and we've been obviously talking about Ukraine. We've been talking about the impact, sanctions, fuel prices rising. But of course, we can't forget the biggest event in all of our lives, I think, really, over the last couple of years. COVID, mercifully, we seem to be at the back end of it. Let's hope there's no more variants of concerns. And minds are turning towards the public inquiry that the Prime Minister has promised us to start this spring, despite the fact that in countries like Sweden, I think I'm right in saying, they've already had their public inquiry. They've produced their report and learning the lessons. We haven't even started. We have, however, we've appointed a chair back in December, but I want to look at this in more detail and understand the timing and the cost and the lessons, and no better person to discuss this with than Professor Hugh Pennington, microbiologist who chaired the E. coli public inquiry back in the early 2000s, I think. Hugh, a very good morning to you. Thanks for joining Tice Talk. Great to see you. So I think I'm right in saying that the public inquiry for COVID and the lessons to be learnt, we have got a chairwoman, Baroness Heather Hallett, a retired judge. So she's been appointed as the chair. Have any other panellists been appointed? And if so, how many might there be?
Well, yeah, what has happened is that the normal structure for public inquiry set up under the 2005 Public Inquiries Act, and it includes a secretary who does all the administrative stuff, finds the premises where the inquiry is going to have its meetings and gather all the data and have its open sort of public hearings. A solicitor who's in charge of the kind of background legal stuff, and counsel, a senior barrister who will be asking the questions. And basically, that's the thing the public sees. The public sees, the hearings at the inquiry house. But of course, before we get to that point, there's an enormous amount of data that has to be collected by the inquiry so they can work out what the questions are that they're going to ask and who they're going to ask them of.
Indeed. So we've got the terms of reference have been announced for consultation. And I guess anybody can sort of chip into that, but in reality, going through all this, when's the inquiry in truth likely to start, in your opinion, and how long might it take?
Well, I don't think they'll be having the open public hearings until early next year.
Wow.
Because it takes at that time, just imagine the amount of data that's already accumulated, all the records that have accumulated, in the last couple of years, well, a bit more than a couple of years, all have to be gone through, and some of them have to be, handled very carefully because they're accounts of individuals, and there's all the problem about basically, you don't want public details about people's illnesses to be made public until they give their opinions and give their approval of that and all that kind of thing. That takes a long time. So public inquiries, by definition, are not quick. They're not rapid because they have to go through all these...
So let's say, Hugh, that it starts beginning of next year. For reason, I mean, how many years, in your experience, do you think that this might go on for? With presumably a massive bill alongside it?
I think what has already been hinted at by the chair is that there might be some interim reports which come out quite early on, before we even get to the stage of having a large number of public hearings. Because if they think there's something that should be done now, on the basis of what they've found out by looking at all the data, I think they feel an obligation to get that out, and that can be got out as an interim report, not the final report, but an interim report, which says, well, what the government hasn't been doing, or what has been doing wrong, and so on. It can point to that, and basically, this is part of the learning of lessons. I'm a little bit of a learning lessons skeptic about public inquiries.
Oh, are you? What? Because they take too long, therefore it's sort of too historic.
not because they take too long. We learn the lessons after a public inquiry, then we forget it. Because I did 2 inquiries of E. coli about 10 years apart, and the lessons that had been learned, and it went through Parliament and there was legislation after the first inquiry, the same mistakes happened again.
But my concern here also, Hugh, is that there are so many vested interests at stake here. People made a lot of money. People have got reputations to protect, so they're all going to appoint lawyers, and that this could sort of drag on and on. And my worry is that the lessons won't be learnt quick enough. I think I'm right in saying one of the select committees in the House of Commons has already produced a sort of interim view from its own committee. Would we not be better having a sort of a much more open, no blame, truth and reconciliation type committee with a defined period to learn the lessons quickly?
You can make that case, yes, because, well, from a personal experience, I've done 2 inquiries on E. coli outbreaks, and the first one lasted about 3 months and produced a report. And basically, this wasn't a public inquiry. We didn't hold our meetings in public. We published a report, and basically that's another way of doing it. And we had one with a foot and mouth disease where we had a much quicker report which said, what are the lessons to be learned? And pointed out that with foot and mouth disease, I know it's a different disease from COVID, but we'd had several public inquiries in that and it hadn't solved the problem. And basically, so public inquiries are fine because they serve not just the purpose of learning lessons, but also something is being done about the problem. It's a way of government saying, look, we're paying attention, we're having a public inquiry. But public inquiries by definition are very expensive. Lots of lawyers get involved, and that's why they're very expensive. And the average length of time that a public inquiry takes before its report comes out is 2 years.
Yeah, you see,
So
I mean, to my mind, there's probably some lawyers listening, but it absolutely sickens me to enrich lawyers at the expense of learning some prompt, quick, smart, common sense lessons. And if it takes years and years with all the vested interests, Hugh, then actually there might be another major medical drama in the interim where we haven't learned the lessons.
Well, that's true. And that's why a public inquiry is in my view, not a particularly good way of learning lessons quickly. It might be a good way of learning lessons eventually, but they haven't got a very good track record in having lessons learned which are then remembered, which is another problem. I mean, once a public inquiry has submitted its report, it finishes. That's it. It has no more existence. And the inquiry chair might say, well, I'm going to come back in 6 months and see what's happened. But I mean,
the worst of all words, of course, would be to end up with some sort of massive Savile-like inquiry into Bloody Sunday, which took 12 years and about £200 million worth of taxpayers' money.
Well, that's why we had the 2005 Act to sort of get things properly organised, get the sort of legal basis for an inquiry to be firmly established. But even then, with all that, and then you've got the problem of you've got to tell people you're going to criticise, that you're going to criticise them, and give them the option of coming back. And that's one of the reasons why some other public inquiries have taken so long, because it takes a long time for that to happen.
Yeah, and
so you've got to be fair. You've got to be fair, and you've got to be
completely. You've got to be fair, but that's why I slightly prefer. I think I do prefer the sort of the more open, no blame. Look, this is what happened. It was unprecedented. We were doing our best, and focus on the lessons to be learned rather than who said what, when, why, and who's to blame.
I think there's room for both. We should be having a quick and rapid inquiry that looks basically at learning lessons, what we got wrong, what we should do in the future. There is a problem, of course, with saying, well, we must be better prepared for the next pandemic, because we don't know what the next pandemic is going to be by definition. So we have to be a bit careful about that preparing for the last pandemic is not a very good idea in practice. We prepared very well after 2009 swine flu on the basis that the next outbreak, the next pandemic would be flu. Well, it wasn't. And that caused difficulties. So we have to be a bit careful. And can I make a particular case that we need to get more of the virologists involved? They have been involved in this, but there are people who are experts in nasty viruses.
Yes.
And they're the people that could be doing that sort of inquiry.
Absolutely right, Hugh. I mean, you're so right. I mean, the idea, we were told we were sort of the best prepared for pandemics, but of course it turned out to be, oh dear, the wrong type of virus, the wrong type of flu. It's a bit like the wrong type of leaves on the line. Hugh Pennington, thank you so much for your wisdom, your experience on this big issue of the public inquiry into COVID. I think it needs to be faster. I think it needs to be focused on lessons to learn as we look forward rather than the blame game. Anyway, give us a call with your thoughts, 0344 499 1000. We'll be taking calls after the break here on Tice Talk at Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV. The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Powered by common sense. Activated by opinion. Bristling with debate. First, fast, freedom of opinion. Unbelievably realistic. All because the nation loves Talk Radio.
Welcome back, my friends, to Tice Talk. We are approaching the end of the second hour. At the top of the third hour, we're going to be going to speak to Simon Calder about some good news, holiday travel updates, easing of restrictions that I think people will hopefully find reassuring. We've got some great tweets coming in. I love this one. Memo to Hugh Pennington. Don't listen to Ferguson's models in the future. I think that's a reference to another professor, Professor Ferguson's flawed, woeful models. That's quite entertaining. And then we've got one here from Karen, who says, morning, I thought we were in 2022 we're supposed to be a more diverse, tolerant society and free to say and do what we believe in. And she goes on to say that she thinks that I was treated disgracefully. We've gone backwards rather than forwards. Well, I'm afraid I think that is right. And it is not good, which is why I'm keen to discuss it. But Mike, you might have some thoughts. Mike is in York. Good afternoon. No, good morning still.
Good morning, Richard.
I'm getting ahead of myself.
Well, for me, COVID had a very good silver lining, if I could explain, for the NHS as well. Because from the NHS actually, in the end, put me in a private hospital.
Right.
To have the surgery. May I explain that since 2014, I've been with the NHS trying to sort out and get an operation on my leg, a bit like a new hip, if you like. And it's gone on and on and on. Anyway, the pain had got so excruciating by 2021, I was taking no for an answer.
So how long had you had to wait to get a new hip then, Mike?
Well, it's not a new hip, but it's leg-based.
Right.
But 7 years.
You'd had to wait 7 years?
7 years. I've been on painkillers, but by 2021, the pain was so excruciating, I was maxing out on painkillers.
I mean, that's just madness. It shouldn't be taking more than 7 weeks, not 7 years.
Well, I'll let you know this. When I went for the operation last week in a private hospital, I wasn't on my own. There were some there that were so bad, they actually paid for the operation. This is madness. But can I just explain? 2021, I was taking no for an answer, so I was referred to a private hospital, and it was unsure whether or not the private hospital I had to pay or NHS. Anyway, the surgeon, in 6 months, they did all the background information they need, the consultation, everything, the scans, everything. I should have had the operation in September, but I got one of the problems with the medication I'm on. It encourages gout, and I got an infection.
Right.
Anyway, in February, I've had the operation. Less than 9 months. And what I would do, Richard, this is what I would do. I won't give that £6 billion to the NHS. I would say to every private hospital, how many NHS patients can you take paid for by the NHS a week? And just supposing the private hospital that I was in, they say, well, we can take, say, 5 a week. So the NHS then contract out.
Absolutely. Mike, I get exactly where you're coming from. If you take a look at our healthcare plan on our website at Reform Party, then you'll see that we have a very similar proposal. My view is that you can get waiting lists down to 0 within 18 to 24 months if you do exactly what you're saying, and you have a schedule of tariffs and you use the private healthcare capacity, much of which is unused, in order to do that. It's actually an extension of what Tony Blair's Labour Party did in the early 2000s. They got waiting lists way, way down. But what you mustn't do is let the NHS decide when they can use the private health. What you must do is put the patient in charge. And that way, capacity will grow, waiting lists will tumble. Mike, thank you so much for your call. Fascinating. Nick is, I think, in Cambridge. Hi there. Morning, Nick.
Morning, Richard. How are you?
I'm good. What are your thoughts?
Richard, I'm sort of questioning your what you're saying with regards to regime change with Putin in Russia. Now, I don't know if that's particularly wise because, as we know, when you have a regime change, you normally have a power vacuum, which normally leads to some form of civil war. With Russia's nuclear arsenal, I don't know if that's particularly wise to call for a regime change, because one thing that you wouldn't want is somebody worse than Putin.
Well, Nick, it's an interesting point, and in a sense, a valid risk. And what you're essentially saying is better the devil you know. But the issue is that, in a sense, Putin is not the man that he was, and given where he's at now, invading other sovereign nations and threatening to use nuclear weapons.
Why do you say given the man he was as opposed to now?
Well, because 15 to 20 years ago, Western leaders felt that he was a man that they could do business with. Various leaders, in a sense, had discussions with him and thought, that actually... sure, he was a robust, strong, patriotic nationalist. Well, we all get that. That's the question: is what's changed? But a number of people are saying that actually medically things have changed. If you look at pictures of him, my deputy, Dr. David Bull, he's looked very closely. He thinks a number of people feel that actually, for example, he may be on steroids. That may be affecting his way of thinking. He may have a medical condition. Hard to know, of course. But what I think you're saying, Nick, better the devil you know. I'm of the view that it's. I'm not sure it can get much worse than someone who's threatening to use nuclear weapons and invading foreign nations.
Well, that's literally. I mean, if he has to go to using nuclear weapons, that's because he's trying to protect himself as well as his country, in a sense. Now, I understand from his point of view where he's coming from. NATO has been an existential threat. That's why he's gone into Ukraine and invaded Ukraine, because he needed that instability in Ukraine in order for NATO not to be allowed to have Ukraine join them. Because as far as I understand it, a country cannot be have turmoil, as in like civil war, etc., like they have in the Donbass region. And that was created, there's no doubt about it, that was created by Putin in the first place.
Yes, a number of people have said that. But if you also look at the alternative, NATO is a defensive alliance, but it's interesting, if countries... It's moved from a defensive alliance during the USSR days to a point where it's now gone on the offensive. Yeah, but it's never attacked anyone. All it did was respond to requests to join it by welcoming other nations. And the interesting thing, though, Nick, is that actually Putin hasn't attacked any NATO country. So actually, he is. I think that shows that he's worried about them. If NATO hadn't gone eastwards, then he would definitely have swallowed up those Baltic states. Surely.
Yeah. Look, without a doubt, he's even said that the might of NATO against Russia, it dwarfs Russia completely. But the problem is NATO is actually missing in action here, because in order to de-escalate this situation, which they need to do, otherwise it's going to end up in a third world war.
Well, that's essentially that's why we've resisted the temptation and the calls to join a no-fly zone. Nick, fascinating thought. I'm going to have to go to the break, but Nick, I really appreciate that. And Nick's view, which you may or may not agree with, is that regime change may bring something worse. Better the devil you know, I think, in summary. Give us a call with your thoughts. Stay with us. We're going to be talking about holiday travel updates and more Ukraine in the third hour on Tice Talk on Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Mid-morning talk.
Sunday talk.
Talk Radio. Take a chance with the Tice Man.
Talk Radio.
Richard Tice.
Sunday morning devotion, there isn't a sermon.
Talk Radio's Common Sense Weekend.
Richard Tice
on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. Good afternoon. We are into the third hour and the weather outside is getting gloomier. I'm trying to get a little bit more optimistic here inside by looking at some of the positives, which is why I want to talk about what may happen when you go to airports in the UK and if you're trying to go on holiday or travelling on business. I've just been through Heathrow earlier this week and a few interesting things that I learned. First of all, regrettably, we're still all wearing masks, unlike in other airports where they've long gone, thank heavens. Well, the travel expert to inform us all about what's going on is, of course, Simon Calder, well known to many, who joins me now this afternoon. Simon, a very good afternoon to you. And, what's going on, Simon? You're wearing a high-vis jacket. Where are you?
I am. I'm in Bar Hill, Richard, in southwest Scotland. The reason I'm in Bar Hill in southwest Scotland is that I'm heading for the Mull of Gatherway, which, as you know, is the southernmost point in Scotland. But I was on the train and I was very much assured that I would not be able to talk to you, so I hopped off the train. There's another one in 2 hours, so I hope you appreciate the sacrifice that I've made for you.
I'm deeply touched by that sacrifice, Simon. Thank you very much. So I went through Heathrow last Sunday and we've still all got to wear masks in the airport and on aeroplanes, and yet at the other airport that we landed at, in the middle of Europe in Geneva, not a mask in sight. And there are sort of talks about some actual airlines themselves are beginning to drop masks. What's your latest understanding of this?
It is an absolute shambles in terms of no country, no airport being in tune with the others. So, for example, you're quite right. TUI and Jet2 have dropped the need to wear masks on flights to and from England and Northern Ireland, but not from Scotland and Wales, because the administrations in those nations still require them. Even if there was no mask mandate in place, if Heathrow wants to make a condition of Richard Tice being in the airport, being that Richard Tice wears a mask, then you either have to accept that or you do not. And so I'm afraid we're going to stumble on like this. It's very similar, of course, to the utter complete chaos in terms of what the rules are regarding international travel. We've had this week, for instance, Hungary and Iceland say, come on in, we don't care, we don't want to see any test results, don't want to see any vaccination certificates. We couldn't give a monkey's, frankly. Well, particularly in the case of Iceland, that's because we're the most infected place on the planet, and so therefore come here at your own risk. But gradually things are, we're generally, it's being a 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But look, we're going to, I hope, talk about the liquids rule. That's a perfect example of something which is brought in, and this was 16 years ago.
I know.
Kind of
let's come on to that. Let's come on to that in a second. But also, we've still got to waste time filling out these passenger locator forms. And I'm sort of thinking, we hear they might be dropped. What's the latest on that?
Well, the latest on that is lots and lots of speculation. As you will know, and your lovely listeners too, bureaucracy, red tape has had a pretty good pandemic in terms of all the information that we must give to government, not just in the UK, but abroad as well. And you also know that bureaucracy tends to sort of stick around long after it's needed. Now, let me give you an example. Back in January, we had the Transport Secretary saying, OK, I've concluded that the test before departure to the UK is a complete waste of time and we're going to do away with it. So I thought, well, that's fantastic. For tomorrow, presumably, if it's a waste of time. No, nearly 3 weeks later, and I calculate that Brits spent £60 million on tests they didn't need while this was in place. Yeah, after we've been told it was a complete waste of time. Sorry about the howling gale. Things are kicking off a little bit here in southwest Scotland.
Okay, that's understood. So the passenger locator forms may go. They
will do in a few weeks. I mean, it's just a question of whether they're out the way before the Easter holidays.
You've got airlines
they all go into a great big bin anyway online, so it's not as though anybody cares.
Well, that's why they should be dropped, as far as I'm concerned, today. I did read that Ryanair may drop masks in April or May, and I guess this is the big thing. Some of the other thing that I did notice and hear about at Heathrow, which actually is good news, and you just touched on it there, was they're doing a security trial so that you don't have to take out your laptop, your iPad, your phone out of your luggage, and indeed you don't have to take out the liquids. I thought this was a very small step for mankind towards progress.
Oh, it certainly is. And look, there's been plenty of kind of experiments around. Anybody going to the US who's been lucky enough to go through the kind of pre-check system, where it's an absolute fast track, generally intended for frequent travellers, but occasionally they allow the likes of me and you through there as well. It's incredibly light touch. It's just kind of, it's almost back to the 70s, kind of, oh yeah, just wander through here. And it's great. And look, what Heathrow's doing is good. What Shannon Airport in Ireland is doing is even better, which is they've said, liquids, don't worry, no, any size you want, forget about the 100 millilitre rule. We think we have such sophisticated scanners that we will be able to detect any threat, so we really don't we're not worried about that. But of course they say that in the first 3 lines of the press release. The next 60 are all saying, but of course if you're going somewhere else, then this role won't apply. If you're changing planes, you're in trouble, pal.
Indeed. But so I asked the security teams at Heathrow, they said it was a trial for a number of months, but it would take years to roll it out across the broader Heathrow and I guess other UK airports. And it feels, again, as though good idea being sort of clogged up by bureaucracy.
Well, yeah, and technology, and the idea is, and this sort of goes back to the Shannon example, it's all very well one airport saying, hey, look at us, we're great, we've got a liquids rule, but you really need it to be cohesive across at least Europe, probably across the Atlantic, probably worldwide, and it simply isn't. And in order for it to be like that, you've got to have everybody having the absolute latest £1 million scanners. And of course, you're a small airport in Eastern Europe or West Africa or something. Thanks very much. You've got better things to do with your £1 million. And unless you get a cohesive strategy that you can apply everywhere, then it just gets very, very muddled indeed. I mean, I was caught out in Doha in Qatar a couple of weeks ago. I was coming back in. I brought me gin, which was really quite a bargain. And I get to the gate, and it's British Airways, so they've got their own special check. And the liquids all applied then. And yeah, the traveller doesn't really have much of a chance here. It has been in place for 16 years. There is sophisticated technology which can effectively do away with it. And IATA, the Airlines Association, together with Airports Council International, has for years been working on something called smart security. And the idea is you get to Heathrow, you walk through after check-in, walk through a corridor, you're unaware that anything's happening, but in fact, they got really smart security looking at everything you're carrying, and you might, well, I certainly would be pulled aside at the end and for a closer look, you walk straight through.
Let me ask you, the tough question there is, Simon, where's the blockage? Is it with the Heathrow executive, or is it pressure coming from the unions who want more security staff, being generally quite rude and unhelpful and not very smiley when you're trying to go through? So are they protecting jobs and therefore making our lives harder?
No, trade unions being objectionable, I cannot, Richard, I find that hard to believe. No, it definitely isn't. In fact, there is a huge crisis coming because we will find after 2 years of absolutely horribleness for the aviation industry, everybody's gone off to get other jobs. And suddenly you come back and it's summer and you need lots of security people. You need lots of people on on border force. You need all kinds of people, and they're simply not there. So it's not the unions. They have in the past made a little bit of fuss about kind of easing security measures, but that's not the blockage. It's certainly not Heathrow, certainly not any airport, any airline.
So who is it? Is it the government?
To travel. It's the government and international arrangements, and the reality that it is, in a fragmented world, something that you need really good international agreements on. And then there's another whole raft, which is that actually this isn't very smart security. What you really ought to do is introduce a random element. That's how you are going to protect people. Just so some days you'll turn up and it'll just go straight through. Other days it will be kind of the old, dare I say, the marigolds.
The challenge there, Simon, is you're applying what's called common sense, and sadly that doesn't exist too much. Simon, thank you so much for you really have gone beyond beyond all extremes, jumping off a train, putting on a high-vis jacket. Look, there he is, showing those who are watching. There's the completely deserted train station. I do hope there's another train that stops there later today.
There is. Yes, there will be in a couple of hours, but it's all worth it to talk to you.
Thank you so much, Simon Calder, the travel correspondent for The Independent, who really has put himself out to give us his latest thoughts and views on some travel updates. We'll keep you informed on that. I'll try and get one of the bosses at Heathrow Airport in a couple of weeks' time to come and give their views. We've got some great tweets coming in from various people. Keep them coming, and also the calls. We've got one here from Lord, who is this? Lord Droid Productions, I think it is. So according to Talk Radio callers, zero carbons, woke rubbish, pro-Putin, lefty nonsense. How these morons could not grasp renewable energy independence lessons relying on regimes like Putin's and his pro-UK. I'm not quite sure where you're going with that. What we do know is that energy independence, energy self-reliance, the evidence is clear. Look at the US. You end up with cheaper, more affordable gas prices, fuel prices and electricity prices. The evidence is there for all to see. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. It's Tice Talk. It's Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Talk Radio.
The microeconomics of rational debate.
Arguments all round.
A radio station, not a panic station.
Translate and decode the issues of the moment.
Talk Radio.
Now available on TV.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. We're well into the third hour, and that was Simon Calder just before the break, who had gone beyond the call of duty. He'd actually got off a train in order to talk to us, give his views, even though there wasn't another train for another 2 hours. Having seen the picture of the station, I'm a bit concerned there may not be another train for another 2 days. But anyway, thank you, Simon Calder. There we go. Lots of tweets and messages coming in. One here, a text message. Enjoying the show as usual. Are you able to tell me what happened after the Salisbury chemical attack by Russia? Sanctions, was it? Why didn't we see the sanctions being applied now for a chemical attack by a foreign country against ours? I think my recollection there is that it was actually a combination of, there was some expulsion of many people from the Russian embassy, I think not only from us, but actually from other countries, including the US, as well as some sanctions. But I think they were fairly, on a relative scale, relatively modest sanctions. Another message here, Russia now will have no appetite to invade any other countries and will probably wish they hadn't invaded at all, given how badly it has gone. Well, I think, in a sense, we've just got to wait and see. Meanwhile, we're going to take a call now from Essex, where I think Dave is. Good afternoon, Dave.
Oh, good afternoon, Richard. I'm grateful for you taking my call.
Pleasure. What's on your mind?
Well, I'd like to make a point, and I'd appreciate it if you'd let me get my point across, and then I'm ready to take any analysis that you can provide. My point is this. Look, I am not a Putin apologist, but we are where we are. And my point is this. The President Zelensky is calling for, airstrikes and this, that, and all the rest of it. But this, to me, is a reckless position to take. At this point, Zelensky should realise that he is going up against overwhelming odds, and for the sake of the women and children and the non-combatants, I think Zelensky now should realise that valour. Let valour, discretion be the better part of valour, and organise a negotiated peace, and for the sake of the women and the children, and instruct his opposing forces to lay down their arms and literally kind of capitulate. Just for the sake that, they can't win, and this is, and any other country, that everyone's just baying for war, all the war hawks in America, the usual suspects, everyone's crying for war. I think we need diplomatic, level-headed men, and I'll state precedent, because everyone's quoting Winston Churchill, but I will remind everybody that in 1942, Winston Churchill ordered the British High Command to put themselves into Japanese expeditionary forces custody for the sake of the civilian population of Singapore. Now, there's no defeat in surrender. In fact, you can glean honour from surrender when you realise you're beaten for the sake of the...
Dave, you make some interesting points, but in fact, a number of your points, I think, are already happening insofar as, I don't think anybody does want war apart from Putin. He's the one who started it. And I agree, look, we are where we are. And of course, Zelensky, you can understand his passionate, patriotic enthusiasm, in a sense, to corral whatever additional defences and resources he can. We can understand that equally. I actually think that all of us are determined to try and avoid progress towards, or sort of anything that moves nearer towards World War III. And indeed, Zelensky himself has got negotiation teams in discussions, and of course it's going to take time. He's actually called, I think, in the last 24 hours for direct talks between him and President Putin. And I guess the point is, what would be acceptable terms? What you're saying is really, in a sense, capitulate in the name of peace. I suspect that for the Ukrainians, that is a step too far. And if you just capitulate to a bully once, then what's to stop him the next time and the next time, when it's Moldova, when it's Kazakhstan, or whether it's trying to go into some of the Baltic states? In other words, where does it stop, Mike? I guess that... sorry, not Mike, Dave. That's the point, isn't it?
Well, if I could just, I mean, I don't know how far you want to escalate our conversation, but if you was Vladimir Putin and you had been accused for the last 5 years of collusion with Donald Trump to swing an election, if you then saw the Hunter Biden laptop, and there's a brilliant book by Miranda Devine on the laptop from hell, with the corruption of the Biden family, with Maurice McGass sitting on all this, not to mention Hillary Clinton's uranium...
I get all that, Dave, but none of that, however, none of that justifies actually bombing and killing people and invading an independent sovereign nation. You can have disagreements, but you don't just... Because you disagree with someone's laptop, you decide to invade a nation, surely.
Yes, but it doesn't justify inciting women and children onto the streets with petrol bombs and Kalashnikovs. I'm sorry, but there must be negotiated... the world is focused on this place now, and the killing and the carnage...
Absolutely. But I think... Well,
we can't keep goading on this small country with this egotistical Zelensky, who is playing his finest hour. And as I say, the fighting on the beach speeches made by Winston Churchill was one of the most reckless things a sitting prime minister...
So Dave, would you rather that we just capitulated to Hitler and gave up and then welcomed him into London? I mean, we wouldn't have free speech now if we'd done that, Dave, surely.
No, but if we put up a valiant fight, there comes a time when
we did. Beaten. Yeah, well, that's what we did against all the odds. We put up a valiant fight in the Second World War and we beat Hitler.
No, unfortunately, sometimes wars are lost and there's always a losing...
All right, Dave, there you are. That's Dave's view in Essex. He thinks that Zelensky is going too far and should capitulate. What is your view? Give us a call. We've got Alan in Buckinghamshire. Hello, Alan.
You're all right, yeah. Thank you.
Are you there?
Hello?
Have we still got Alan? Yes, Alan, what's your thoughts?
My thoughts are this. The overarching theme is this is the Western civilization of Europe, which is mostly Christian, against the Eastern Orthodox civilization that's Russian. And we need to decide where we want to go to see how we end this. Do we want to negotiate and compromise and look inward both at Russians' wrongs and our wrongs? Or do we want to give them a bloody nose and expand Western Christian civilization of democracy into the Ukraine and defend that? And that will escalate to close to World War III. So we need to either concede Russians' annoyances at Western democratic expansion. And NATO is a defensive alliance, but America, its biggest player, has gone around policing democracy in the world, which is effectively expanding our ideology. We're in an ideological battle, and we need to decide how much blood we want to shed for it over Ukraine. Or do we want to compromise and come to the negotiating table and give him the Donbass region and the other regions that he's... Or we have to evaluate, will he stop there? And
well, that's right. And if you give in to a bully, Alan, then the bully will keep going. And of course, let's be clear, it's not our decision, Alan. It's actually a Ukrainian decision. They may take guidance from Western allies, but fundamentally, it is a Ukrainian government's decision.
Yeah, I agree, because they're the ones in the conflict. But we have to, if we're going to look on, do we? If they have in their own sovereign nation decided to become democratic. If you're Putin, you're going to see that as a humiliation, because they've rejected the communist Eastern ideology in Europe that is prevalent at the moment. So, but
you might be humiliated, but that doesn't mean you actually invade another country and devastate the country, destroy and wound thousands and thousands of people. That's barbaric.
That's what America did in 9/11. They used that as a justification because they were humiliated to invade Iraq and Afghanistan. So we have to look at ourselves and think we've done the same. Whether we like it or not, we have done the same. I think democracy is the better ideology, but we are not without any wrongs. So we can't sit on a high horse and say...
Yeah, no one's perfect. No one's perfect, but the reality is it's Putin alone who decided to invade a separate sovereign nation. No one else, and NATO's never done that. Alan, thank you very much for your thoughts. Alan there, concerned about ideology, about the West's ambitions. I think I want to remind people that NATO is a defensive alliance. It's never actually aggressively attacked anywhere, unlike President Putin. But give us a call with your thoughts, 0344 499 1000. Coming up, we're going to be going to, after the break, an American journalist who's just got back from the Polish-Ukrainian border with his latest thoughts and the views. How do people feel in the States about this European war? Stay with us here on Tice Talk on Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Richard Tice on Talk Radio.
Common Sense Radio for common sense people.
Talk Radio. Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
Richard Tice.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. We're into the last half an hour. Lots of messages coming in from those calls. Some not very happy. One says, "Who was that? Vladimir from Essex." But another says, "You say Ukraine shouldn't surrender for the sake of the women and kids, and Putin's the one who wants war. Yes, he does. But with Ukraine, why should we get involved? Then dig our women and kids out of the rubble. Get a grip of reality." Richard, well, the point is, in a sense, at what point, if you don't stand up to a bully, if you keep rolling over, then the bully will just keep taking country after country. We saw that with Hitler. We don't know the extent of Putin's ambitions. But as someone said earlier, an appeaser is someone who keeps feeding the crocodile, hoping that the crocodile will eat the appeaser last. I think we need to learn those lessons. But no one's saying this is easy. It is not. It is really, really difficult. Anyway, we're going to go to our next guest who's in the States, Matthew Termund, who's a Polish-American investigative journalist, to talk about who I think has just been in and around the Polish-Ukrainian border area and just getting his thoughts, but also the mood of how people are feeling in America, the extent to which it is top of the news there, and whether people agree with President Biden's stance or not. Matthew, very good afternoon to you. Well, it's afternoon with us. I think it's the morning with you. Thanks for joining me. So what did you learn on your recent trip into the war zone, and How's that sort of translating in terms of what you're now seeing back in the States?
Sure. Well, first, thank you for having me. Good to be with you. I spend a lot of time in Poland. I live in Poland part-time. I've been to Ukraine many times. And when I was in Poland last week, or last couple weeks, I went to the largest border crossing, the Medyka border crossing. Now, for your audience, there's 8 Polish Ukrainian border crossings essentially in a straight north-south line. And the largest is Medyka. It's outside of a town called Przemysl. And what I saw there was pretty heartbreaking. I mean, it just women and children pouring over, by foot, by car, and by motor coach. And these motor coaches fitting 60 to 80 people, just all women and children, a lot of crying. I mean, these are people who don't know if they're ever going to see their husbands, fathers, brothers, sons ever again. Obviously, I think everyone knows that there's been a sort of martial law instituted where all men of able-bodied fighting age from 18 to 60 are mandated to stay in country and help with the effort in any which way they are able. So going and seeing that and documenting it and, talking to people in the States about it, putting forward footage of it, it's a powerful visual. And now, obviously, everyone's seen what Poland has done and stepped up. And, this is the Poland, much like Hungary, that is oft maligned by Brussels and Strasbourg, that they're not, upholding European values, whatever fluid target that actually is. But meanwhile, they've stepped up and they've taken millions of refugees. 2 million people have left Ukraine, women and children. And Poland has taken at least half of them, with the balance being split between Hungary, Moldova, Slovakia. And what I saw, there was no refugee camps. People just coming. There was more food and more clothing, and women leaving their children's strollers that they'd outgrown. They're just waiting for Ukrainian mothers to come pick up and use. So like the whole country coming in and engaging this sort of humanitarian objective to stabilize the situation has thus far created no need for, a ghettoization, a refugee camp dynamic. People were driving, my friends in Warsaw, part of their volunteer efforts were driving from Warsaw 6 hours to the border and just picking up families and bringing them to homes or schools or convents or wherever to shelter them.
And I guess one of the questions, Matthew, is obviously, and we're hearing and touched on it earlier today, is, if the numbers grow more and more from the 1.5, 2 million in Poland that we're hearing, if it doubled, what is the limit? And I guess that must be on everybody's minds, and the need, therefore, for other nations to absorb some of that capacity.
Yeah, and I think this has been a shock to this European sort of zeitgeist, the system, right or left. It's, in Poland, it's a very internecine political battle in Poland for many, many years between sort of the Eurocentric left and the sovereigntist Catholic nationalist right, which now runs the government, runs the country. Law and justice. They have a unilateral mandate to govern. They have the presidency. They've got the prime minister, the premiership, and they really do control the country. And obviously, they have this sort of like Catholic charitable impulse. But the left and the right are very united in Poland for the first time. It reminds me, as a New Yorker, I grew up in New York and I was there for September 11th, that for a few weeks around September 11th, post-September 11th, New Yorkers got along and were pleasant to each other. New Yorkers are famously prickly and not too friendly. And seeing this in Poland, like I walked by the Russian embassy, which occupies a prime piece of land in Warsaw, and there were protesters, and this was late in an evening on the 4th or 5th day of the invasion, and it was the same lefties I recognized who were kicking their heels up, screaming about the attack on the Polish judiciary by this government that the EU has been working hand in hand with, as well as the young nationalists, Ruch Narodowy, who are, very, very aggressive young nationalists, maybe equivalent to soccer hooligans joining in politics, and we're famous
Matthew,
for attacking the Russian embassy in the past.
And so we've got the situation now where, in a sense, we know that it's probably going to get worse over the coming weeks. We know that the number of refugees fleeing Ukraine will grow. What's the mood that you're experiencing in the States in terms of people's? Is the mood primarily, well, it's a European, it's happening in Europe, it's a long way away, it's their problem, they've got to deal with it? What's your sense on that?
So whereas in Europe, the left and right seem pretty united, and you see this across governments, you see this across the financial complex, even the Swiss banking system has a skewed neutrality for the first time in 1,200 years. And so there's a united nature that, because it's on the doorstep of Europe. Europe remembers 1939. This is the largest human migration and forced refugee status from within Europe. In the U.S., it's much more split. And the left is feeling this humanitarian impulse more, and the right is more consistently saying, not our problem. Now, the right on its own is very, very broken up and segmented, fragmented.
But Matthew, if the right is saying not our problem, they're sort of supporting President Biden. Is that right?
Well, Biden is talking out of both sides of his mouth, because Biden, look, the U.S. is very heavily supporting Ukraine in the most important way they can without escalating to a full NATO and American-led invasion of this part of the world, which is weapons supplies. Weapons are coming overland across the border en masse. Stingers, javelins, small arm ammo, as well as people. There are many military contractors and ex-military I know who are going over there. You're creating almost like the Crimean War, the first Crimean War, I'm talking the 1850s, where it's a different time, like a Byronic or a Hemingway-like ideal Spanish Civil War, where people from all over the world are joining the Ukrainian Territorial Defense Forces and bringing weaponry with them. And that's very, very interesting. That hasn't happened. And, listening into your segue from the previous segment, where you said this analogy about the crocodile, I'm in arguments all the time where this Neville Chamberlain attitude, people don't remember the geopolitics of 1935 to 1939, the appeasement, the Sudetenland is not our problem. The Polish incursion by the Germans is not our problem. Well, I said this in front of the Brandenburg Gate last week or a week and a half ago when I did a Bannon show. Well, you may not care about geopolitics, but geopolitics cares about you. And this has a domino effect potentiality. Now, I do think that Biden and NATO are right at the moment to not escalate with full invasionary and incursionary capacity. But by supplying the Ukrainians with weaponry, they have people, they have troops, and there are individuals flowing across the border to help. I think that's the right move.
Just finally, Matthew, that might be right at the moment. If Putin uses chemical bombs, do you change your view on that?
Yes.
Where's the line?
Yes. It is incumbent upon us not to escalate dealing with Putin, because if he escalates, then we have to be reactive. But my view is that in Russia right now, he is becoming full Stalinist very quickly. And 6 months ago, the odds of an anti-Putin putsch were 0. On day one of the invasion, they're 30%. They're moving toward 50% and higher. Now that he's arresting generals and blaming them, this is out of the Stalin playbook.
Got it. Okay, Matthew, I've got to head off, but thank you very much for those thoughts. That's Matthew Termund with his views and also experiences the mood in the States and what he saw on the border and the success of the Polish humanitarian efforts so far. But of course, it all depends what happens with the numbers going forwards. We've got David in Coventry. David, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Richard. I'd just like to say in response to David, you were speaking with 10, 15 minutes ago, if we had done in 1939 what David is advocating that we ask the Ukrainians to do, we would all have been speaking German for the last 70 years. And while I do speak some German, and I have German relatives, I would much prefer not to be forced under the German jackboot to do that. Quite frankly, if you're dealing with a bully, you have to stand up to him. And if you don't stand up to him, you will lose.
Well, that's...
And look what happened. Because we didn't stop Hitler before the war, we let him take the Sudetenlands, which is done exactly what it's done with Putin. With regard to Ukraine, we encouraged, and we ended up in the 30s and 40s with a war that killed 60 million people.
Dave, I think you're right, and David, sorry, and the previous caller who was Dave from Essex, I agree. In essentially, he just wants to roll over, and the problem with that is that if you don't stand up to a bully, then the bully will just eventually eat us all up. And in a sense, Churchill, under huge pressure, let's not forget, including from people like Lord Halifax in his own cabinet, resisted calls to negotiate and to surrender and stood up against the bully. The question, of course, for the West and for NATO is when to say to Putin, enough is enough. That's the difficulty, isn't it?
Well, what we should be saying to Putin is we shouldn't be telling him what we're going to do and what we're not going to do. Biden was a fool when he said we will not put boots on the ground. What Biden should have said was all options are open, because then Putin doesn't know what we're going to do.
So just to finish, David, if Trump had been still in charge, do you think this would have happened or not?
Absolutely not. Not
David,
a chance, because Trump would have told Putin, behave yourself or you're going to get a bloody nose.
David, I think that's very interesting, and I agree with you. David in Coventry, thank you very much for your thoughts. Give us a call in the final segment of the show, 0344 499 1000. Stay with us. It's Tice Talk here at Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Talk Radio.
Bish Bosh Berserk.
Full contact, common sense conversation.
Lively debate, now with 0% drift and dither.
Always read the label. A roadmap for the future of debate. Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. We are approaching the top of the hour, into the final segment. We'll take a couple of calls in a second. Just one interesting tweet here. Richard, great show, thank you. I'd like to tell me what we're going to do with all those millions of solar panels that are on our roofs and in the countryside. What's going to happen to them? I think we're just creating another problem. Well, I'm a fan of solar panels on people's roofs, whether it's homes or whether it's industrial buildings, because essentially it's a sort of win-win. I'm not a fan of solar panels on fields that consume, what is actually could be useful, productive agricultural land that would help us produce more of our own food, because we need to be more self-reliant, not just on energy, but also on food. And of course, solar panels can last 15 to 25 years, as I understand. So actually quite a lot longer than all the cars we drive. And we seem to find things, we essentially know how to deal with cars. So I think solar panels have got a really long life, but I want them also, preferably, I want them designed, created and manufactured here in the UK using cheap energy. Anyway, let's go to Simon in Basingstoke. Simon, good afternoon. What are your questions, thoughts, ideas?
Well, I think Europe needs to wake up to a few things. One, America is pretty much energy independent and it's food independent. Europe is not. So America can sit back and say, okay, well, if Putin takes over Ukraine, we'll keep funding an insurgency, and if it goes on 5 or 10 years, it's not going to have a material effect on the US, whereas it will have a devastating effect on Europe. So I think Europe needs to start acting on its own and independently. And I think your previous call, your most recent caller was right. I think Biden has literally encouraged Putin to act and not force Putin and his military to think, well, if NATO does intervene, what forces will we need to keep in reserve if that happens? And literally, I think Europe needs to accept that the United States is an immensely divided country politically, and it has the weakest president in its history in charge now. And he's going to be there for another 3 years. So we really need to start having the means and the will to act on our own.
It is a massive wake-up call, and the idea of thinking that, just-in-time delivery on a global basis is all fine when the sun shines, but the moment the sun doesn't shine and that there's a storm, you find that the just-in-time supply chains break. We saw it with COVID, with PPE. We're seeing it with gas and with oil. Dependency on rogue actors who could suddenly do something, as Putin has done with Ukraine, just shows how foolish and naive I think many European nations have been, despite, in many cases, having cheap, affordable energy available to use themselves.
Exactly. And to be honest, Biden is only compounding the problem with the current negotiations that he's having with Iran. If those if an agreement is reached, I will bet you £100 to the charity of your choice now that Israel will launch a massive airstrike against Iran within a matter of months. And what will Iran do? Iran will shut down access to the Persian Gulf, which they're perfectly capable of doing. And then what happens to oil prices?
And so that actually highlights the point about if you've got energy resources, then be independent, be self-reliant and use them, because those sorts of scenarios, they can play out.
Exactly. And to be frank, Boris needs to completely abandon his green agenda. It's a naive, and it wouldn't work if none of this would happen. Well, if none of this was happening, it wouldn't work. It definitely won't work with America withdrawing from the role of the world's policeman, however badly it does.
No, that's right.
It guarantees.
Simon, you know I'm talking about net zero all the time. Simon, thank you very much. I've got to just quickly go before we get near the top of the hour to Jim in Gateshead. Hello, Jim.
Hi, Richard. How are you?
Yeah, good. What's on your mind quickly? We've just got a minute or so.
Right, just quickly, it was basically that we shouldn't be surprised that Europe will be disunited during this. I mean, look at it when the PPE for the COVID thing, I mean, they were stopping it crossing borders to other countries. You look after your own at the end of the day. And my worry is, we're going on about, like, the leaders are going to Ukrainian patriotism. So how are we going to reintroduce patriotism into this country and toxic masculinity, which we're going to need, because it's been derided for so many years.
And indeed, of course, the whole lefty woke agenda doesn't help that, does it, Jim?
It doesn't help it in the slightest, and that's the only good. It's not great what's happening in Ukraine, but it's the only good thing to come out of it, because they need to shut up and put up and we need people back.
It's a massive wake-up call, that is for sure, Jim, which obviously, in a sense, we shouldn't have got there in the first place, but as someone said earlier, we are where we are, and one of the lessons out of this absolute horror show is we've got to be more independent, and we've got to stop being naive. We've got to be prepared for the worst and plan for the worst. You always want to sort of work for the best, but you've got to be ready for the downside. And I think so many people have just been completely wrong-footed by this absolute catastrophe. Jim, thank you very much for that. One more tweet came in about solar panels. Interesting point here from Neil in Swansea, who says, Richard, are you aware that solar panels, after 10 years, the farms are classed as brownfield sites, therefore suitable to build on? I don't know if that's right, Neil, but if it is, you could very quickly change that policy, because that sounds complete madness. Agricultural fields are there to grow crops on. And anyway, it's been a full-on show, and Bob Mills has just cruised into the studio. Good afternoon, Bob. How are you?
Good afternoon to Richard Tice. Are you all right? Did you have a good ski?
I did, thank you very much.
Oh,
yes.
lovely. I was thinking about you.
Oh,
I was thinking about your slaloming and all that kind of stuff. A cracking show. Well done, lovely. And what you've done is you've cleared the air for me.
There you go. I've cleared the air. So now, what are you going to share with people?
I've got Louise Jensen. I've got 2 authors. I've got, listen, the middle hour, Korean art.
Wow.
Big exhibition of Korean art. And then in the final hour, we have what we have, and then we finish with, as you know, live music, Thunder. If you're a fan of good English rock music.
Don't go anywhere if you're a fan of good rock music and Thunder. Thank you to my wonderful production team, to everybody who's listened, called, tweeted, texted. Same time, same place next week. You've been listening to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.